Well, that's true. Chris, you lead a prayer in a minute? Okay. I want to go ahead and start. I know it's depending on your timing. This could be a little early from what we normally start, which is a little bit late from what we should start. Interpret that sometime. But there's a whole lot to cover today. And so I want plenty of time for discussion, possibly, and interaction, and some talk. And so we'll go ahead and start. And Chris is going to lead us in a prayer. So, Chris.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for everyone who's here, Father. We thank you for another opportunity to come and worship in your name, study from your word, learn about places where Jesus walked when he was here on this earth. Father, we thank you for everything in our lives, all the material things we have, Father, they all come from you. Most of all, we're thankful for your Son, his willingness to come and die on this earth for us. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So, I don't know whether you'll have cheers or crying, whichever, or nothing, but this is the last of all of our pictures. So this is number 14, if you can believe it. We've been doing this for 14 weeks and skipped a couple in between because of some special classes we had. So about 16 weeks or more we've been going through this. And today's thing can't really be broken up between one and another because there's not enough of the last part to merit its own class. So I'm trying to squeeze everything in on the last part here. So we're dealing with the Pool of Bethesda this morning, which connects you to a church building called St. Anne's Basilica, I guess, or something like that. And then also the Mount of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane. So we're squeezing all that in because it's right there in the same area. So we're starting with just a reminder. One of the things is when you look at a map now, I think you're good. Every time you see at least the east side of the Mediterranean coast, you're going to go, that's Israel over there. I know where that's at. So I'm helping us at least find some places geographically. And the two bodies of water that you might see, the smaller one at the top, which is the Sea of Galilee. And then that longer stretch at the bottom there, Dead Sea. And the little stream in between, Jordan River, which is not, well, it kind of is a little stream. But anyway, the Sea of Galilee, just to give you a bit of perspective, is 22, I said feet last time I was talking about this, miles long and 15 wide. So it's not a huge body of water. And that beige area on the map, you won't see it if you're flying over, is beige. But the beige area basically is the area called Galilee, and Jesus spent most of his ministry in that area. Although really he was born in Bethlehem, which is closer to where the yellow arrow is pointing directly to Jerusalem right now, or the word Jerusalem, and that's where we're focusing today. But just a tiny bit to the right is Bethlehem, a little bit south of that. And so that gives you an idea where Jesus was born, and then most of his ministry up around the Sea of Galilee. And you'll remember that just from reading through the Gospels. If you don't, at least you'll start noticing these areas. And when it says, and he entered Capernaum, you go, we've seen those pictures. We've seen that synagogue. And it's such an exciting thing to think, visualizing that. And Peter's house possibly was one of the pictures we looked at, which is very much in that area. There are some inscriptions on the inside of that house that we couldn't get into because someone decided it was his house and they built a church building over it, kind of hovered over the top, so we couldn't get in it. It's their property, I guess, or at least they have control over it. So anyway, that's all that's happening in that area. And you say, why are we talking about all that? Because we're supposed to Jerusalem and just moving through the thing. So reminding myself, I've got to use this to operate the slides. So the next picture, just a bit of a model of what Jerusalem looks like. So when you hear Jerusalem, think of a walled-in city. And that's basically when Jesus went to Jerusalem, it was about this, well, it's bigger than this because this is the model. This is inside the museum in Israel. And so they have that sketched out. It's quite a big area, even for a model. But it gives you a picture in the lower part. Let's see here, if I can point from up here. This little thing doesn't work. But the lower section over here is known as the city of David. That's all that Jerusalem was to start with in the time of David. Jerusalem goes back that far. And then right up above it, the larger structure then is where Solomon added to it. And the temple is built there, the Holy of Holies and all that. So what they looked at was that section here. And city built out, and people put in homes that sit around the area. And then this larger walled-in area was what Jesus saw when he went to Jerusalem. And that's what you have because of the Roman Empire enclosing all of Jerusalem, still protecting it. So it is a walled-in city, and that's for the protection. But what we're looking at today to start with is the Pool of Bethesda. So up in the upper right hand in blue gives you at least a reference arrow pointing down where it says Lion's Gate. It'll say a different gate as we read this in John 5 in a minute. But right below it, you'll see the little comment that says Pool of Bethesda. So if you're visualizing north and south and you're looking at it, that's where it's at. Now this walled-in intersection here where it says Dome of the Rock, that is what Jesus did not see in his day and time. That was built after they rebuilt the Jerusalem area, and it's now under Islamic control. So that little sector right there that belonged to Solomon now is under Islamic control, and the Dome of the Rock hovers over where they think Abraham tried or was about to offer his son Isaac. So it becomes a sacred place in Jerusalem. There are other things that happen there, but we don't have time to deal with all that because we're talking about the Pool of Bethesda. When you talk in modern day times about the Pool of Bethesda, you talk also about a church building that is right on the edge of the pool called St. Anne's Church. The Byzantine Basilica has got it big enough you can read it here, but it partially stretches over two water basins collectively known as the Pool of Bethesda, built upon a series of piers, one which still stands today as an entirety. The pool is known from John 5. We're going to turn to that in just a moment. The story of healing the paralytic of Bethesda. It describes a pool in Jerusalem near the sheep gate. Remember I said there was a different, it said Lion's Gate in the picture? And I'm guessing it's the same one. It just has a different name today. Described in John 5 as the sheep gate, which surrounded the 5 covered colonnades. So these colonnades, we'll get to see some of the pictures of this. Now turn to John chapter 5 for just a moment. And I want to read what goes on there as we talk about this. And when we get to this, you're going to notice something in your translation you might have noticed before. You may have known about this, or you may not have, depending on your exploration of different translations and all from before. But I'm going to start from John 5 and verse 1, and I'm going to read from the New King James Version. So if you've got an NIV or ESV, it might read a little different, and you might have a little footnote along there, or along about verse 4. So after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. There we go, right, city. Now there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches, 5 columns. We're talking about what we're describing right here. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. Verse 4, for an angel went down into a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. How many do not have verse 4 in your translation? A few of you. No, I'm not picking you apart because you don't have, or whatever, you have an inadequate translation. But we'll read the rest of this and we'll come back and talk about this for a second because this relates to what's happening here. So verse 5, now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and he knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, do you want to be made well? Which some people would go if they were standing around going, duh, I can't walk, I'm laying on this mat next to the pool, what do you think I'm here for? But Jesus is trying to highlight something. Obviously, there are lots of people around, and he's making an emphasis about what he's about to do. It wasn't that he didn't know. Of course, he knows everything before he asked the question, but he's looking for other people to listen to what's going on. The sick man answered him, verse 7, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water's stirred up. But while I'm coming, another steps down before me." So he doesn't get in to get healed. Jesus said to him, "Rise up, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked, and that day was the Sabbath. Now verse 10, this is following it. It jumps to the next verse, but a little period of time passes, and while the guy's carrying his mat around, it says, verse 10, "Then the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, 'It's the Sabbath, it's not lawful for you to carry your bed.'" Now, a couple things you might not have ever realized, I'm going to take some time to go through this quickly here, is if the man is there alongside a place that is known to heal people, and there's a question will come about on this, and he gets up and walks away, and there's crowds of people around, number one, he might not even be seen or recognized as far as, oh, that guy was the one that was laying there. He'd just be one of the crowd. He could get up and blend in pretty easily. Now, if you pick up a mat, a rolled up mat or a long one with poles, whichever the case may be, you've got a bigger thing to be maneuvering through a crowd of people. In Argentina, right after we'd gotten there, no cars, they were automobiles, but we couldn't afford a car at that day and time. Everything was extremely expensive. So buses were our transportation. So I go to a hardware store, the only one that I knew, there were closer ones to the house, and I buy this 5-gallon bucket of paint. Everybody ever lift a 5-gallon bucket of paint? I know some of you have, and it's pretty heavy. 2 or 3 buckets can, but you're maneuvering this one. And I also bought a curtain rod. Couldn't remember to measure when I left the house how long I was needing this shower curtain, so I bought the whole 8-foot length rod. I'll cut it off when I get home. It'd been easier to cut it at the right length and have the exact thing. It would have been about 7 foot, but I didn't remember. Now, an aluminum rod and a 5-gallon bucket. So guess who's carrying the pole? Hand that to Melanie. We get to the bus stop, because that's how we're riding, and we get up on the bus, and we're maneuvering through. Now, I'm carrying this bucket through a crowded bus. People are standing in the aisles, holding on. It's public transportation. It's crowded as normal. And Melanie's like Sir Lancelot with this 8-foot pole trying to maneuver through the crowd. And everybody's, "Ooh, ow," just trying to dodge the pole. Say that to visualize the guy that's carrying the mat through the crowd. If he hadn't been carrying the mat, he wouldn't have been noticed. But he's bumping into people right and left, trying to maneuver through this. Jesus didn't have to tell him to pick up his mat. He could have said, "Leave that there, you don't need it anymore." And that'd been fine for him. But he was making an obvious point for everybody else that was around. I'm doing this, and you better notice something different now in this guy's life. And now go back to the text. What day was it done? On the Sabbath. And everybody will notice he's doing something on the Sabbath that he shouldn't do because he's carrying it. Jesus is going to highlight in this text, I'm in charge of the Sabbath. And he could have whispered to the guy and said, "Wait 5 hours, when the Sabbath ends, get up and walk away, nobody's going to notice." Could have. But he's drawing attention to this whole process that will come up in John 5 about he is in charge of the Sabbath and how God made the Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so this is a long illustration about what's going on in the text. But back to verse 4, what we're talking about here is, some of you had it in your Bible and some of you didn't. It's not a defective Bible, probably. I don't think it would be. But the fact is that back when they were translating the New King James Version, they translated it from what Greek text? Somebody correct me. Textus Receptus, which was not Greek text. It was, anybody know? Well, it was about the angel, yes. The text that they got it from was in Hebrew translated to Greek, and not Greek, but rather to Aramaic. I'm losing my concept or my memory here. It wasn't a Greek text. They were translating it from an Old Testament text that came into the English, and the text that they're looking at is not a Greek text. It's an older manuscript, the Septuagint is, but the Septuagint is not in Greek. So they have two options when they're translating the New King James and the King James. They can pick a bit more modern text or manuscript, or they could go back to an older manuscript, but they have to do it from a different language. So it means it's a translation of a translation. They opted for the older manuscript. The older manuscript had verse 4 in it. But the Greek text they were looking at that time did not. So they're conflicted a little bit when they're going through. What do we do with two manuscripts when one has the text and one does not? Well, they picked, this group of men did, for the older text, trusting the reliability, I'm going to emphasize that, the reliability of every scribe that ever comes along copying the Bible. That he's made this major vow, I will not change what I'm copying. Now, given that set of circumstances and the vow that he's made, when he rolls out an old manuscript, and you all have a Bible that's over 20 years old? Mine's kind of withered, and it's because it is over 20 years old now, but it's been through a lot of different countries and pages I've flipped through while I'm speedily turning. I've torn pages, and some of the spots are actually starting to fade. 20 years old. Good paper, good ink. Okay. Almost as old as me. So some of us have old Bibles, and you realize the longer you keep these things, the more weathered they get. Can you envision a manuscript that's a few hundred years old, written with ink that's not really as good as our ink, on paper that's not paper, it's papyrus, and so therefore a lot of these pages get withered and worn, and you can't always see the words in them. Now here's the thing. You've got a choice of taking a withered, worn manuscript, either one, but one that's maybe a little bit more worn, and when you get to that area where John chapter 5 is verse 4, you have a blank spot. You can't read it. It's crumpled, and it's worn down, and it's faded. So as a scribe, he's looking at this, and he goes, I'm not writing anything that's not there. But another guy looks at another manuscript sometime later, and his does have it. And so he writes it this way and copies the manuscript. Another guy who found a manuscript sometime before that finds there's nothing there. And so you have a variance occasionally on manuscripts. A long time ago, real quickly, there was a movie that came out and some stuff written in, I believe it was Time magazine. It'd been going around for some time, but they decided this would be the moment to put it on Time magazine. That we don't have reliable Bibles nowadays because they're copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, the manuscripts. And then you got translations of translations. So therefore, how can you really know? Because they're based upon people who are working through what they have at best, which is aged, and it's all copies of copies of copies of copies. So therefore, this English Bible that we have really isn't what God actually asked Peter, James, and whoever else are writing the different books you're reading. It's not exactly that. So you can't really trust, this is the point they're making, the reliability of what you're reading here. Because it's copies of copies of copies. And so these articles and these critics come out with this to ultimately come down to, it's up to you to decide what God's saying because you can't really trust the Bible. So I'm going back to emphasize that, number one, the confidence that you have in the guys that are the scribes. Even though you might not have a verse that's in there, here and there, trust what's there. Because they take vows to copy meticulously everything. In addition to that, when they are copying these things, some things that these guys in the newspapers or the magazines don't tell you is they not only copy what's going on, they copy it not only verbatim, but they count the number of words on each page. They count the number of lines on each page. They'll count for the middle word on a line, the middle word in a text, and all these different things to cross-reference to make sure they haven't skipped a word. They're so dedicated in copying exactly what they have. If they find a mistake, they go back and make sure it's changed and corrected. And so here's what you have is this, the fidelity and the nature of these guys that are copying this that leave you with the confidence that their copy is like if you'd Xeroxed it perfectly. You that copy and paste off of things, because today with the computers, and you don't want to type because you might miss a word here or there. I do that a lot, but they don't have that, but they go back through and read every word. They count the words, they count this and count that to make sure everything's done right. So I just want to point this out as you're looking at John 5 and what's going on, because as we're dealing with this Pool of Bethesda, this arises in your text. Now, St. Anne's Church, built somewhere around 1128 to 1138. The significance of the church is the location that it has alongside the Pool of Bethesda. So some people came along 1,000 years later, basically, and they said, this is a holy spot. A miracle was performed here, and we're going to put up a church in honor of. And so those are some of the things that happened there. In 1856, in gratitude for the French support during the Crimean War, the Ottoman Sultan, whatever you can do in his name, presented to Napoleon III this piece of property. It was restored, therefore, by a majority of what remains today is original. Currently, the St. Anne's belongs to the French government and is administered by the missionaries of Africa, commonly known as the White Fathers for the color of their robes. During the Roman period, however, notice I've got a little footnote on this, or a star. During the Roman period, a pagan shrine to either an Egyptian god, Serpius, or the Roman god, both these gods are gods of healing, are on the grounds at the Pool of Bethesda. During the what period? The Roman period that Jesus lived under. So during the time that Jesus was going through this area and goes up to the Pool of Bethesda, the Roman government has set up this area as an area that dedicates itself to a pagan god of healing. Now I say that to say this, as we look at the pictures here. There's the St. Anne's Cathedral, and right back to the back on the left hand, get my left and right turned around, is the Pool of Bethesda. It looks a little bit better when you see it from the opposite side of Bethesda and you're looking over the pool to the church. And so you can see where excavation is done, the arrow pointing down to where that's at. A little bit of an aerial view of what it's like. We did a special flyover no. I robbed this picture off the internet, but it gives you an idea how big the Pool of Bethesda is. So when you're looking at St. Anne's and you're coming by, there's a difference in its structure from the other cathedrals that we've looked at. Remember Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Church of the Firstborn, and the ornate candlesticks and gold hanging here and pictures and all this stuff. And you look at this, and there's the inside. No pictures, no crucifix, no adornment, no gold, no glitter, no nothing. And that's just the simplicity of whoever really is running this. It's kind of interesting. On the outside, same thing. Very different from what we looked at before. And that's now the Pool of Bethesda. As you walk into the St. Anne's area across the courtyard, and you go down some steps, you get down inside here. And did you ever envision this being this big? So when you're reading John 5, and it says he came alongside the pool, and he talk about the crowds of people, we're digging down to get to the level of what they were at during Jesus' time. Now, obviously, a pool is going to even be a little bit lower than the other part. But it's not like a giant swimming pool, but the structure's there, and you can see where the columns are built and basically the height of what it was like back in Jesus' time. A lot bigger than you expected, wasn't it? I was visualizing a small swimming pool, a little bit of rocks around it or whatever, the Pool of Bethesda. Now notice the walls all around the different areas. I want to point this out because there's a question as you're looking at the stone walls to the right side. See how much smaller they are than these inside here? That's an outside wall that was built during Jesus' time, Roman time. Not during the earlier times, but the Pool of Bethesda is somewhere surrounded is surrounded in this area by a variety of different walls. Dug down deep, much larger than you're imagining, and lots of archways, Roman arches, etc. You get down a little lower and you notice the rocks are much larger, probably back a few hundred years before the time of Christ. But it's a pretty good sized structure. And so you can go through all the different areas if you want to take your time there. The guy that ran the tour suggested that the wall that comes on the outside of the Pool of Bethesda was really built after the original wall of Jerusalem was built. That the Pool of Bethesda lies outside of the old Jerusalem wall because it belongs to a pagan god, as we were talking about some of the people back in that day and time. The pagan gods felt like this was a place of healing. But it doesn't get included inside the Jerusalem wall because the Jewish people don't follow what's being said there. And it's a speculation that if that's the case, that the Pool of Bethesda really was outside the original wall, that verse 4 might have gotten written in by a scribe somewhere along the line about the angel stirring it and God making the healing, or it might have been a pagan ritual of an angel or something. But it originally might not have been part of what God was doing, but at best a satanic operation or a strong belief of pagans that there's healing done by the pagan gods. Nonetheless, when Jesus comes to this area, there's a gathering of people, as we're reading in the text, waiting for something to happen so they can be healed. And the point is that Jesus has the power to heal regardless of where the wall is, one way or the other. Just to give you a little bit of architectural design on what's happening here. So which side the wall is, they call it Bethesda to be on the inside of the Jerusalem wall or the outside. And is verse 4 originally there? I think so. And the text, and I feel like it's all part of what God was doing during that time in healing people. One of the stones that was toppled over that they haven't straightened back up, they're still in excavation. They're still rebuilding, and they're trying to figure out where each one of these columns go. And so you see that one there, and the next one where they do have a column placed back in position. At the base of the column, both on that one and the one inscribed here, is a what? A cross. Cross look familiar to you? What would a cross be doing? Yeah, it connects you to Jesus. But think about crosses in Jesus' time were not holy items, but were something that came along later in recognition of what Jesus did. And so some of these columns that may have been built might have been put on, this looks like a Crusader cross. Now, I don't know if it goes back 1,000 years or if it goes back before that time, because before the Crusades were out, there were crosses designed in that direction. They just took that emblem and it became one of their emblems for their crusades. But we're looking at pieces of architecture and design that have been built up over the years to something that was back in Jesus' time, but every piece wasn't there originally. So you're still trying to decide which side does the wall lie and how does verse 4, verse 5 fit within the manuscript. I will always ascribe to the fact that the copyists of the manuscripts, the scribes, were tedious and methodical in every bit of the way, never trying to add anything to it. The sacred oaths that they took in doing these things just kept them from ever thinking of doing such. But we still have the question of verse 4 or not verse 4. Either way, the text is accurate as far as what it's portraying. Has nothing to do with doctrine as far as teaching us, other than the fact that we're left with the question of what happened at the water without Jesus. Could something happen? We don't know. Pool of Bethesda. Quite deep as you're looking at how far down it goes. And so in time, with earth adding to or building up of mounds, etc., you have maybe a 20-foot change in the road level, etc., from what the pool might have been originally. Southern side of the pool there, I'm not sure why I put that back in there, but it seemed to indicate a little bit about the structure there. The other one here is a medieval crypt, so there are some things that were added to it after Jesus' time. The St. Anne's Church, built in 1100s, again, around Crusader time, and this is a medieval crypt, again, Crusader time. And so part of the walls and etc. have been added to since the time of Jesus, including the crypt there that goes up in this area where they had buried some of their people. Quite an extensive wall, reused by the Crusaders. So they've rebuilt some of the things there. So this gives you a picture of how tall the wall is when you're standing down looking up. Okay? All right. Across the wall, looking eastward, is the Mount of Olives. When you're on the Mount of Olives, this is where we were taking this picture here, there's down at the lower section a Jewish cemetery. Straight up above that then is the Kidron Valley, if you've seen that in the Bibles. And then you look almost dead center to the top or to the right just a little is a gold dome, which is Dome of the Rock. This is where Solomon had his part of the extension of the temple added to it, and the wall was expanded from Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock is Islamic rule today, and it's built over the top of what was once the Holy of Holies section of the temple. So they now have rule over that section, or power, government authority over it. But you'll see the Jerusalem wall all along that whole sector there, and then the dome right there as you're looking at this. So it's not that far away. This is just a camera shot, and if you're using a little snapshot off of your phone, which is what this picture was taken from, I remember, then the distance looks a little further than what it actually is. So Jesus is in the Mount of Olives before his crucifixion, praying and looking across and seeing Jerusalem. A little bit closer up with a zoom lens to give you an idea. So you see the wall down at the very bottom of the picture, the dome right above it. So that's the wall of Jerusalem that surrounds the whole Jerusalem area. And the dome then was once where Solomon had his section built, where the temple was. So you back up just a bit, and you're looking from the Mount of Olives, the olive trees, left and right, and you're looking down on the cemetery that belongs to the Jewish people. You get down to where their cemetery is, and no flowers, but they have rocks on top of their graves. Rocks are, anybody think about this or know the Jewish background of putting rocks on top of cemeteries or graves? They're a sign of, I've been here, I've thought about you, I'm thinking about you, meditation. Schindler's List. Anybody seen it? At the end of Schindler's List, they have a whole line of Jewish people who survived the Holocaust that are filing by and are putting a rock on his grave in honor to Schindler for what he had done in saving so many Jews. Same thing here. It's just dropping off a rock there. Their graves are obviously different than ours. They're built above the ground. And frankly, I can't recall. Obviously, you can see it's not a very sealed grave. There are holes in the end, and the part on the top doesn't look that sealed. And so inside that, there could be smaller little, can't think of the word right now, where the bone, what? Louder. Niche. There's another word too that goes with it, but where the bones, etc., are put, and this could be a family grave with several of these together. Some of the smaller ones, ossuaries, what the word I'm looking for. After the body decays, where they've put it in a cave to start with, when it's buried, it's not covered over, then they take the bones and what's left and they put that in an ossuary. And then they somewhat seal the top and they pick it up and carry it with them, much like people do today with the ashes sometimes when they have a cremation. And so those are contained and put in certain areas after the body's decayed. Now, whether this has several ossuaries in it and it's a family burial site or it's a waiting period before the decay and then they take the bones out, I don't know which, but you're part of the Jewish cemetery. You're looking across from the Mount of Olives. And so these are a few of the pictures that we took when we came into the Mount of Olives. The tree on the right is a pretty old tree. This is a picture I took off the internet. I think some famous photographer went over there at some point, and they decided they would really meticulously clean up everything. You know, when you do a family photo, everybody puts on their best whatever and combs their hair because the photographer's coming in. So this is what the photographer got to see when he came in to take the pictures. This is what they took in 1914, rather. Not much different, except it's in black and white than what we saw when we went there. So that was over 100 years ago. But the trees, pretty much like that. And those three trees are three, or might be, but two of them are pictures of the same tree, of some of the oldest in the area. But the trees themselves in the Mount of Olives date back about 900 years. And they keep replanting trees, but they don't plant them from somewhere else. They graft any of the trees that they put in the garden from trees that had already been there. And so was this one here. So we're not sure exactly how far back the line of succession goes, but these 900-year-old trees have been there obviously a long time and are part of a series of successions of the mount. But what you do see is a pretty large area, much bigger than this auditorium. That's probably like an acre in size as far as moving through there. So lots of walkways, beautiful area to meditate, and they've kept this grounds like that since the time of Jesus. Some of them is left a little bit more rustic on purpose. And you see the walkways and all. And that's the end of the slides. Gethsemane, I had a little bit of study. I had to stop and think about this because Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and yet it was the Mount of Olives. And it is exactly the same. And so what I was able to pull off of my studies is Gethsemane is the garden at the foot of the Mount of Olives. And you're thinking the lower part of it, which leads you then right down the Kidron Valley and straight up to the wall where Jesus could enter in Jerusalem. Okay. Any questions? We've got just a couple minutes. Question about manuscripts. Leave anybody can. Or Rush.
Recognizes this was also a Christian site, or do the Muslims have it? They own it.
Muslims have it, and that's it.
Got it.
As far as on that site,
Yeah.
they're not going to recognize anybody except who they are, because they're the true ones, and they date back. They also believe that that's, I think, where Muhammad ascended up into heaven from that same location, And they also, some have a belief that that's where the world actually began and God created the first man and was there. And so there are different ideas from different backgrounds, not from a Christian or Jewish background, except that most people believe that that is the site, very close to it, where Abraham came to offer Isaac, because it's on the same mount that all of Jerusalem is built. So as we're looking overall, one of the things I want to leave you with is that this same piece of property that you looked at in the picture, not just this part, but all of Jerusalem, is the same piece of property that God has been putting his people through or in for thousands of years, way back before the time of Christ, back before the time of David. Just a little bit north of Jerusalem as you're moving up the Jordan River. Remember, first picture we looked at where you had Bethlehem and Jerusalem very close alongside the Jordan, and just a little bit Sea of Galilee. How about that? Right above there is a small tributary from Jordan River that comes up to a place called Dan. And so the waters are real fresh in that area. That was a piece of property that belonged to the tribe of Dan. The tribe of Dan is in the area, if you'll recall, back in Abraham's time. Now we're going way back. Genesis 19, when Lot, Abraham's nephew, is taken captive by some marauders. And they raid the area. They take him, his property, and all that stuff, and they go off with him. And it says, and Abraham gathered 600 and something men together to go out and to go get Lot. And it said they went as far as Dan. And we saw that in one of our pictures, and the structure that was built around it and the large entrance to it, what Abraham had to go through. All of that area is the same section. It's not like from here to England to South America to... It's not spread out like that. Everything we're looking at from basically from the beginning of time all the way through is all in that one little section. And most of it right around the Israel-Jerusalem area. That's why I guess most people call it the Holy Land, because it's where the apostles were, where Jesus was, where David was, where Solomon was, and all the way back. So I think it's about time for our bell to ring here. I want to just leave you with, notice the names of the cities sometime when you're reading through. Recognize, too, the manuscripts that we have and the translations that we have are done by people that are dedicated. Translations today by groups of individuals. Although one person might sit down and have a persuasion on one doctrine or another, they have a compilation of committees. When they translate these that are from various different religious backgrounds, scholarly in their ways, but still balanced by a variety of different people that translate the different books of the Bible. And so we have dedicated scribes, scrupulous translators, and a text that brings us that we have God's Word in these good modern translations, no doubt about it. So we'll stop right there. Let's have a prayer. What? Read what? John 3? Of John? John chapter 3, verse 36. He who believes in the Son has everlasting life, and he who does not believe the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides in him.
Yeah, that would condemn a lot of the Jews because they didn't believe in him.
Yeah, definitely Jesus is God's Son, and we have life in him. Okay, we got people waiting on the ramp, so we'll stop right here. Keep studying.